At 17 minutes past midnight, Daniel Mercer woke to the sound of metal striking wood. Not thunder, not a fallen branch. A drill bit screamed outside his bedroom window, followed by the low growl of a truck idling without headlights. He sat up, listened once, and knew the noise was coming from the narrow garden beside his house. Daniel crossed the dark room and lifted one corner of the blind. 3 men were pulling down the cedar fence. Beyond them stood Grant Voss, his neighbor, holding a flashlight and a can of white marking paint. Grant pointed deeper into Daniel's yard, and a worker drove the first post there. The new line cut straight through Nora's lilac bed. Daniel remembered his wife kneeling there, soil on her cheek, insisting the bushes needed morning sun. She had been gone 3 years. For 3 years, Daniel scattered fresh mulch around those roots every April, then leaned on the rake when grief made breathing difficult. His first instinct was to step outside. His hand even reached for the bedroom door. Then he saw Grant spray a white line across the grass before telling the workers where to dig. Daniel stopped. A boundary marker did not appear because a homeowner painted one, and a midnight construction crew did not create a legal property line. If you believe patience can be stronger than anger, stay with Daniel, because the smallest detail would soon matter most. Years earlier, before taking the maintenance job at Roosevelt Middle School, Daniel had located buried water and utility lines. He was not a surveyor, but he had learned a rule that mattered tonight. Once a site was disturbed, memory became argument, while records became evidence. He turned off the bedroom light and opened his phone. First, he recorded the truck, the workers, and Grant's face. Then he captured the time, the white paint, the removed panels, and the distance from the corner of his house. His doorbell camera was already saving a second angle to the cloud. Grant glanced toward Daniel's window once. For a second, the flashlight beam climbed the siding and paused below the glass. Daniel remained still. Grant smiled, turned back to the crew, and spoke loudly enough to be heard through the wall. By sunrise, he said, the mistake would finally be corrected. Daniel did not know what mistake Grant meant. He did know the old fence had stood in the same place when both men bought their homes. He also knew Grant had spent the last month discussing a detached rental unit, a permit deadline that tightened every week. At 6 minutes past 1, the workers loaded the final old panel into the truck. Grant walked the new fence line, pressed each post with both hands, and photographed the finished work. Before leaving, he kicked loose soil over something near the rear corner, exactly where Nora's oldest lilac had once grown. Daniel waited until the taillights disappeared. Then he went outside without touching the fence or stepping into the trench. From the undisturbed side, he photographed every post. He measured nothing, moved nothing, and argued with no one. At the edge of the damaged bed, he placed a stone beside the last patch of untouched ground. Inside again, Daniel opened a canvas notebook and wrote the date, the time, the truck's license plate, and every sentence he had heard. On the final line, he wrote only 4 words: "Do not confront him yet." Grant believed the fence had moved 11 feet. What he had actually moved was the first piece of a lie into public view. By 7:30, the new fence looked as if it had always been there. Fresh cedar panels ran across Daniel's garden, turning Nora's lilacs and nearly 12 feet of lawn into Grant's yard. Grant was already outside in pressed khakis, drinking coffee beside the work, as though he had simply repaired a broken gate. Daniel walked toward him, carrying only his phone and canvas notebook. He stopped several feet from the fence and asked, "Who established the new boundary?" Grant smiled without looking surprised. "The old fence was wrong. My contractor followed the existing markers. You have been using part of my property for years." Daniel glanced at the bright white paint on the grass. "Which surveyor placed those marks?" Grant's smile tightened. He said no surveyor was necessary because the original markers were obvious. Then he held up a folder containing a printed parcel map and an HOA notice already signed with his name as treasurer. The notice ordered Daniel not to remove, alter, or interfere with the fence while the association reviewed a long-standing encroachment. Grant had filed the complaint against Daniel, then used his office to circulate it before Daniel could respond. Two neighbors stood near their mailboxes, pretending not to listen. Grant turned toward them and raised his voice. "I tried to handle this quietly, but some people become attached to land that was never theirs." One neighbor looked at Daniel with sympathy. The other looked at the new fence and seemed to accept it as proof. Daniel felt heat rise behind his ribs. The lilacs were now on the opposite side, their roots packed beneath fresh soil. He wanted to tell everyone what had happened at midnight. Instead, he asked Grant to identify the exact marker the workers had followed. Grant pointed toward a rear post. "Right there," he said. The crew found it. Daniel remembered the video. Before Grant sprayed the lawn, no mark had existed near that post. More importantly, the workers had never paused to uncover metal or check a monument. They had followed Grant's flashlight and the line he painted himself. Daniel did not reveal that yet. He photographed the notice, the fence, the paint, and the disturbed garden from public angles. Then he asked for the contractor's name. Grant laughed. "You should spend less time collecting pictures and more time accepting facts." Daniel wrote the sentence down in front of him. That small act changed Grant's expression. For the first time, he noticed the dates, times, and numbered entries filling Daniel's page. Grant stepped closer to the fence. "Careful," he said. "Making accusations against an HOA officer can become expensive." Daniel closed the notebook. "I asked a question." At home, Daniel copied the doorbell footage to 2 separate drives and saved still images showing the lawn before the white paint appeared. He compared them with photographs from Nora's last summer. In one picture, she stood beside the lilacs and the fence aligned with a notch in the old retaining wall. The photograph could not establish a legal boundary, but it proved something Grant's story required people to ignore. The fence had moved. Daniel emailed a brief preservation request to the HOA, asking that no additional digging occur until an independent review. Within 20 minutes, Grant denied it from the treasurer account. His reply said the project was routine maintenance, the line was undisputed, and Daniel's objections appeared emotional rather than factual. Daniel read that word twice. Grant had taken the garden, controlled the complaint, and now entered Daniel's grief into the record as evidence against him. But the midnight video showed exactly when the white marks and Grant's official story first appeared. The next morning, Daniel carried Nora's deed box to the kitchen table. Inside were tax statements, insurance papers, and photographs she had labeled in careful blue ink. One envelope held the subdivision plat from when they bought the house. Daniel unfolded it slowly, afraid age had made the creases fragile. Near the rear corner of the lot, a small circle marked a brass monument. His old utility work had taught him how easily people confused a map with a measurement. A parcel image could suggest a boundary, but only field evidence tied to reliable control points could establish where that line belonged. Daniel was not licensed to make that determination. He could, however, recognize when someone was pretending certainty without doing the work. He drove to the county records office before work and requested the original plat, later amendments, and any survey notes connected to the block. The clerk returned with scanned copies and an older index card. The card referenced the same rear monument, plus 2 control points along the road. Nothing in the file showed that the boundary had ever been changed. Daniel photographed the documents and asked whether county staff could locate the monument. The clerk warned that the public map was not precise enough to settle a private dispute, but she accepted his request for a field review. She also told him not to excavate, disturb posts, or remove concrete before an authorized inspection. Daniel agreed. He wanted a clean record, not a faster argument. That afternoon, a county technician met him near the back fence with a metal detector and a handheld receiver. Grant appeared within minutes, arms folded, insisting the visit was harassment. The technician searched the surface around the locations shown on the plat. Fresh filled dirt, fence posts, and a narrow ribbon of new concrete interfered with the first pass. No monument appeared. Grant laughed softly. "There is your proof," he said. "That pin has been gone for years." Daniel looked at the disturbed soil near Nora's oldest lilac. In the midnight footage, Grant had kicked loose dirt across that exact spot after the workers finished. Daniel said nothing about the video. He only asked the technician to note the concrete, the fill, and the failed surface search. Before leaving, the technician explained that an absent surface marker did not erase a recorded boundary. A licensed surveyor would need to recover evidence from multiple points and compare the measurements with archived records. Grant interrupted to say the old documents were unreliable. Then he pointed at the new fence and called it the only visible line that mattered. The sentence unsettled Daniel more than the threat from the day before. Grant was no longer claiming a hidden marker guided the crew. He was arguing that the fence itself had become truth, because everyone could see it. By nightfall, photographs of that fence were circulating in the neighborhood group beside Grant's message that county staff had found no evidence supporting Daniel. For a few hours, it looked as though the lie had won. The county had not located the monument. The HOA had warned Daniel not to touch the fence. Grant had a printed map, a confident voice, and a structure standing where he wanted the boundary to be. Daniel had photographs, footage, and an old plat, but no independent measurement yet. At home, Daniel placed Nora's photograph beside the plat and studied the retaining wall notch behind her shoulder. The monument on the old record should have been only a few feet beyond it, beneath the new fill. He wrote one question in his notebook. If the marker had been gone for years, why had Grant himself buried that exact place after midnight? 3 days later, a yellow permit notice appeared on Grant's front window. The county had accepted an application for a detached accessory unit behind his garage. Daniel stood across the fence reading the project number while workers unloaded lumber near the side yard. The drawing taped inside the window showed the new fence as the existing property boundary. That phrase changed everything. Grant was no longer defending a repair completed in good faith. He was using the midnight fence as a fixed reference in an active permit file. If the line moved back, the proposed unit would lose the side clearance and equipment access shown on the sketch. Daniel photographed the notice from the sidewalk and requested the public application. The permit office sent him a preliminary site plan signed by Grant 2 weeks earlier, before the fence had been moved and before Grant claimed any dispute existed. On that drawing, Grant had labeled the future fence position as an established boundary. He forwarded the document to the HOA board with the footage preservation request. Grant answered from his personal account this time. He accused Daniel of interfering with lawful construction and warned that further contact with contractors could be treated as harassment. An hour later, the HOA issued a temporary directive forbidding Daniel from removing the fence. By afternoon, another crew began cutting back the lilacs to widen the passage beside Grant's garage. Daniel called the permit office and explained that the work depended on a disputed line. The receptionist could flag the file, but she could not stop every activity without a formal review. Daniel watched a worker carry away one of Nora's oldest branches. That evening, Grant came to Daniel's porch carrying a document and an envelope. The document was called a neighbor acknowledgement. It stated that both owners accepted the fence as the practical boundary. The envelope contained a cashier's check large enough to cover new landscaping, but not the value of the land or the effect on the permit. Grant kept his voice low. He said disputes became expensive. County offices moved slowly, and neither man needed lawyers examining every old measurement. If Daniel signed that night, Grant promised to replace the damaged plants and tell the neighbors the matter had been a misunderstanding. Daniel asked why the form mentioned the accessory unit. For the first time, Grant stopped smiling. Then he said the project had nothing to do with the fence and pushed the check closer. Daniel returned both papers without touching the pen. He told Grant the county could finish its review first. Grant's jaw tightened. By morning, construction materials blocked the side yard, and a temporary camera faced Daniel's garden. Inside the permit office, technician Maya Chen compared Grant's application date with Daniel's footage. She noticed that the sketch describing an existing boundary had been submitted 13 days before the fence existed. She also saw that the disputed strip supplied nearly all the access shown for maintenance and emergency entry. Maya placed a hold request on the file and sent the records to County Surveyor Elena Ruiz. Elena did not call Daniel to congratulate him. She requested the original video files, the unedited doorbell clip, and access from his side of the property. Her caution reassured him. She was not joining his argument. She was testing the evidence. Daniel received no promise that he would win. He received only a notice that an independent field review had been scheduled. Grant still controlled the visible fence, the HOA directive, and the story most neighbors believed. But his offer had revealed what the midnight work was protecting. He had not moved the fence because he believed the land was his. He had moved it because his permit needed everyone else to believe it was. Elena Ruiz arrived at 9 on Thursday morning in a county truck carrying a tripod, a receiver, and 2 sealed folders. Grant had already gathered 3 neighbors beside the fence. As though the survey were a public trial he expected to win. Daniel stayed near his porch with the original files ready. Elena introduced herself, explained that she would verify records and measurements, and refused to discuss conclusions until the work was complete. Grant smiled, saying the evidence already favored him. Grant followed Elena toward the side yard and repeatedly pointed at the cedar panels. He called them the obvious boundary and asked whether she could confirm that before wasting county time. Elena planted no equipment near the fence. Instead, she walked to the road, uncovered 1 documented control point, then crossed the block to verify another beside a drainage inlet. Daniel watched Grant lose patience as every step denied him the quick declaration he had staged the morning to obtain. Once the control points matched the archived plat, Elena positioned the tripod beyond Grant's driveway and began taking readings across the properties. The projected line did not follow the new fence. It passed through the disturbed lilac bed and continued toward the rear corner where fresh soil covered a narrow strip of concrete. Grant said the reading must be wrong because the monument had vanished years earlier. Elena asked who had reported it missing. Grant answered too quickly. Everyone knew. Elena marked a small rectangle around the projected location and asked both owners to remain behind the flagged line. A county technician removed loose fill by hand, exposing concrete that looked newer than the retaining wall beside it. Beneath one thin edge, the detector gave a sharp tone. The technician cleared another inch of soil and revealed a tarnished brass monument, upright and undamaged. Daniel felt relief, then grief, because Nora's crushed lilac roots were tangled across the buried marker. Grant stepped forward before Elena finished documenting the find. He said Daniel could have planted the monument during the night and demanded that the county remove it as fraudulent. Elena did not argue. She photographed the cap, recorded its depth and orientation, then compared its position with measurements from both control points. The monument landed within the tolerance shown in the notes. She explained that Daniel could not reproduce that geometry by guessing one location. Grant's accusation had created another record. Elena then measured the fence at the front, middle, and rear. The encroachment was not a crooked contractor error. It formed a deliberate straight line running 11 feet 8 inches inside Daniel's recorded boundary for 73 feet. The new posts also aligned with Grant's permit sketch, not the original fence photographs. One neighbor lowered her phone. Another stepped away from Grant. He stared at the instrument display, then asked whether the numbers could match the fence. Elena quietly said no. Grant changed tactics. He said the crew must have misunderstood his instructions and that any movement was an innocent construction mistake. Daniel finally opened the folder containing the unedited midnight footage. He did not play it yet. He asked Elena to preserve her measurements and the recovery photographs with the permit file. She confirmed that the field report would include every observation, including the fresh fill above the monument and Grant's accusation. Across the fence, Grant called his contractor twice. The first call went unanswered. On the second, Grant walked toward his garage and lowered his voice, but Daniel heard enough to understand the question. Grant wanted to know what the invoice said and whether the crew had kept his messages. Until that moment, he had treated the workers as witnesses to his version. Now he feared they were witnesses against it. Elena packed the tripod and told both men the survey answered where the fence belonged. Who ordered it? 5 days later, the county scheduled a joint review in a windowless room above the permit office. Elena sat beside Maya with the field report, photographs, and archived plat. 2 HOA board members attended. Grant arrived 10 minutes late, carrying a leather binder and an attorney's card he never placed on the table. Daniel brought 1 canvas notebook and a flash drive. Grant looked at the smaller stack and smiled, as though the difference in paper already proved who mattered. The chair asked Grant to explain what happened. He offered a simple story. The original fence had always been misplaced. His contractor discovered the error during routine repairs. Daniel became emotional because the lilacs belonged to his late wife. Any permit discrepancy was clerical. Grant said he had tried to settle peacefully, but Daniel preferred conflict. When he finished, 1 HOA member nodded. The story sounded believable because it required everyone to ignore the order of events that actually occurred. Maya connected a monitor and said the county would present the record chronologically. First came the unedited doorbell footage. At 12:17, the old fence still stood. Minutes later, Grant sprayed the new line himself. No surveyor appeared. No monument was uncovered. No worker measured from a control point. Grant called the video incomplete. Elena displayed the recovered brass monument and the independent measurements tying it to the plat. The fence missed that line by 11 feet 8 inches exactly. Grant blamed the contractor. Maya opened the invoice. Under special instructions, it stated, "Owner to mark final line, night installation requested, remove existing panels before dawn." Attached messages showed Grant sending a photograph of his white paint and telling foreman Luis Ortega to follow it exactly. Grant claimed the words were misunderstood. Then Luis joined by speakerphone and said he had questioned the lack of survey flags. Grant told him the county had already approved the location. It had not. The room changed. Grant stopped speaking in short sentences. He accused Luis of protecting his company, Maya of delaying development, and Elena of relying on outdated records. Each explanation collided with a document already on the screen. Maya then displayed the permit sketch submitted 13 days before the midnight work. It labeled the future fence position as an existing boundary and used the added strip to show service access beside the proposed rental unit. The plan had required the fence. Grant pushed back from the table and called the review a conspiracy. Elena corrected him once. The county had found no conspiracy, she said, only a measured encroachment, a buried monument, inaccurate permit information, and records showing who directed the work. The chair suspended review of the accessory unit and referred the false declarations for investigation. The HOA members looked down when Maya noted that Grant had issued an official directive in a complaint where he was personally involved financially. The chair asked Daniel what resolution he wanted. Grant stared at him, waiting for a demand large enough to call revenge. Daniel could have asked for public humiliation or punishment beyond the documented harm. Instead, he requested an independent fence restoration, an assessment of the damaged garden, correction of the permit record, and Grant's removal from decisions involving his property. He also asked why a self-drawn boundary sketch past intake after a formal dispute had already been filed with evidence. No one answered immediately. Daniel placed his notebook on the table and said the problem was larger than one dishonest neighbor. A fence moved at midnight should not become official because the person who moved it controlled the first complaint. Maya proposed a review trigger for projects near disputed lines. Elena added protected documentation for recovered monuments. The HOA agreed to draft conflict of interest rules. Daniel had not built the case to take from Grant. He built it to stop him. The permit hold became permanent 3 weeks later, after the county completed its review. Grant was ordered to remove the fence, correct the site plan, and pay for an independent crew to restore Daniel's boundary. The accessory unit application was withdrawn before a hearing on the inaccurate declarations. Grant called that a victory because no one had taken his house or charged him with theft. Daniel understood the performance. Grant was trying to rename consequences before anyone else could. The restoration crew arrived in daylight. Elena's field report was clipped to the work order, and both owners received the same measurements. No one used white paint as authority. No one asked Grant where he believed the lines should be. The workers removed each midnight post, exposed the brass monument without touching it, and rebuilt the cedar panels along the verified boundary. The garden did not return with it. 2 lilacs had lost too much root, and an arborist confirmed they would not survive. Grant's insurer paid the documented replacement cost, but money could not recreate Nora's hands in the soil or the summers attached to those branches. Daniel kept one living cutting from the oldest bush and planted it beside the restored fence. He did not call it compensation. He called it a beginning. The HOA removed Grant as treasurer while it reviewed his use of the association account. Its new policy required any officer with a personal or financial interest in a complaint to disclose it and leave the decision entirely. Boundary disputes could no longer be decided from photographs of fences alone. A challenged line near proposed construction now triggered independent documentation before the association issued an order. The county changed its intake process too. When a permit relied on a boundary within a narrow distance of new construction, applicants had to provide appropriate certification instead of labeling a hand-drawn line as existing fact. Staff received a direct review channel for evidence that monuments had been covered, removed, or disturbed. Recovered markers were photographed, indexed, and protected before nearby excavation continued. Maya sent Daniel the final correction notice with one handwritten sentence at the bottom. "Thank you for making us slow down." Daniel placed it in the canvas notebook behind the first midnight entry. He did not frame the survey report or display Grant's invoice. The purpose of evidence, he had learned, was not to decorate a victory, it was to make denial harder for the next person. 4 months later, a woman from the next subdivision reported that a contractor had poured a driveway over a marker near her lot. The old system might have told her to settle the matter privately and return with better proof. Instead, the technician opened an independent review, preserved the photographs she brought, and paused the permit before the concrete could turn a question into an official assumption. That evening, Daniel stood beneath the porch light and looked across the garden. The restored fence followed the line Elena had measured. Beside it, the young lilac cutting held 3 new leaves. A round protective cap now marked the brass monument Grant had tried to bury, visible enough that no future owner could pretend it had vanished. Daniel opened his notebook to the sentence he had written after midnight. Do not confront him yet. He understood it differently. Silence alone would not have protected the land. Anger alone would not have exposed the lie. What mattered was choosing the moment when truth could be measured, preserved, and heard. When power moves the line, keep the evidence, then make the system put it back.